I'm Tuomas Sandholm. I'm the Anhil Jordan Professor of Computer Science here at Carnegie Mellon. I'm the founder and director of the Electronic Marketplaces Laboratory and co-director of CMU AI. I'm also the founder, president, and CEO of 3 startups: Optimized Markets, Strategic Machine, and Strategy Robot. Yeah, my research on AI began in 1989. I was doing my master's thesis in Finland, and I built the first automated negotiation system for self-interested agents that was truly distributed. It was in the space of trucking, which was the least sexy of applications, but it's actually very combinatorial, and that led to a multi-decade agenda for me in automated negotiation. Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So it was based on my AI studies and, of course, the popular movies, watching Terminator, and I wrote some kind of little philosophical pieces on what the AI could be as a student in the student newspaper and little things like that. And then my studies in operations research, and they came together in that application. Yeah. I was doing AI communications before I really knew anything about AI. It's like so many people today.
That's been the case since 1920, it seems.
Yeah, so I think that the kidney exchange work that we've been doing has been communicated pretty well, for example, by the National Science Foundation, by CMU, and so on, and hopefully also by us. In that, people think about AI oftentimes as a bad thing and it's going to be terrible for humans and all that, but the reality is totally the opposite. The AI is adding a lot of value, and here it's really life and death things. And there are hundreds of people, if not thousands, who are walking around today because of it, who wouldn't be otherwise. And
Could you say a few things about that system?
Yeah, so we run, or our software runs the nationwide kidney exchange for the United Network for Organ Sharing, which is the government contractor that controls all of the transplantation in the US. And we are optimizing the kidney exchange side of it, which is a form of live kidney donation. Kidneys are by far the biggest transplant in terms of number, more prevalent than all other transplants combined, or more than all other solid organ transplants combined. And kidney exchange really allows these willing but incompatible live donors to swap donors in clever ways, so that patients who don't have a compatible donor actually get compatible donors. And we run the kidney exchange for UNOS we've been running it since the outset in 2010 when it went live. We optimized the plan for 159 transplant centers together every week. So it's 69% of the transplant centers in the US have already opted in. Yeah, that is very tricky. How do you communicate complex issues to the public? And I think, clearly there's the absolute honesty that's most important, that there's no hype, no exaggeration on the good sides or the bad sides. You try to be objective, but that's only half the challenge. I mean, the other half of the challenge is to try to communicate these very complex systems to people who don't really have the background to understand them at the deep level, and that's always a challenge. It's in startup companies I face that as a challenge in selling complex systems, and then in these fielded systems where we've successfully fielded them, like in sourcing markets, we've done that commercially. In kidney exchange, we've done it pro bono. It's hard how to communicate it, and we have several ideas on kidney exchange which are actually provably better than the status quo, and they're not yet fielded. And a big problem towards fielding them is communicating them to the public. Even to experts in kidney exchange, communicating these mathematical things is quite difficult. Yeah. Not much. So I don't think AI has really changed labor that much yet. if you go back to the kidney exchange, there it has certainly increased employment in that more transplants are getting done, so you need more surgeons, more anesthesiologists, more nurses, more hospital beds, all that. And you also need transplant coordinators. So the transplant centers need to have people who are talking to the exchange and people who are actually at the exchange talking to the transplant centers. So there, it's not a huge number of people, but still these are new jobs that didn't exist before. In the sourcing applications where we fielded combinatorial auctions for strategic sourcing, where companies and governments buy goods and services from their suppliers, there it became more that humans became kind of higher level decision makers. Instead of humans trying to sift through the number of solutions of what you could buy from whom and combinations of those, where the number of combinations is bigger than the number of atoms in the universe, you let the computers do that. And that was one of the ways the public can understand that idea of combinatorial auctions. You let the AI sift through those low-level possibilities, and the humans are talking more about, hey, what side constraints should we put on this? What should be in the objective? How do we value these trade-offs and so on? So overall, the idea is that you lift the humans to making more kind of value judgments and let the computers be good at what they are good at, which is sifting through a lot of different combinations. And I think that a lot of humans don't really understand that line. They have a hard time separating the means from the ends, the ends being the value system and the means being how you get there. And I think that AI really helps on the means side. And it's important to separate those. We've seen that also in the kidney exchange. Oftentimes humans confound those two things, the means and the ends, and we're trying to always push the humans to say, okay, what is the ethical framework? What are these value judgments? You tell us what that is, and the AI is going to figure out how to get there. While humans have a tendency to micromanage and go into these low-level things as to, oh, in this situation you should do that, in that situation you should do that, and humans are exceptionally poor at that.
As the systems become more sophisticated, and as practitioners who aren't necessarily developing the tools but are still working with the tools, also developing their sophistication.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So one thing that I think is a very good prediction, I feel very confident about, is this separation of means and ends. I think humans will more focus on the value judgments, and you let the AI sift through the different combinations. And humans will not so much be making the individual low-level decisions at the operative level of here, in this situation you should do that, in that situation you should do that, but more giving these higher level value judgments, and the AI is going to instantiate it into the practical domain. So that's one. Then more speculative is kind of, people talk a lot about oversight, humans having oversight over AI, but if you really go back and think about it, who's making more mistakes, humans or AI? Well, I would argue that humans are making a lot more mistakes than AI, so maybe there should be AI oversight over humans, and maybe it should be a little bit of both ways, and that remains to be seen how that should work, and how do you hand over control. But again, coming back to that, I think the low-level controls are going to shift more and more towards the AI, humans just making the higher-level value judgments. Maybe tensions and the notion of tool. If you have an AI system that oversees, make sure people don't make mistakes, in my opinion, that can still be a tool. And it doesn't really undermine human dignity in any way. And another thing is that people say that AI should never be in charge of life and death decisions over humans. And I understand that argument sort of when it comes to autonomous weapons, but in the kidney exchange, the AI is making life and death decisions every week. And that's good because it's making better decisions than any human could. So I don't think it's that simple that it's somehow demeaning to humans when AI makes life and death decisions over us. That can actually be a good thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting counterexample because of the ways in which the rapidly developing systems in these new domains also begins to particularize these questions.
To me, it's not so demeaning, but we need to even think about what is demeaning. Like if the autonomy of making some sort of little decision here and there is shifted to an AI, why would that be demeaning to a human? Yes, it reduces the human's autonomy in a way, but the other way to look at it is it augments the human's decision-making capability so that the humans can make better decisions, and the high-level decisions, the judgment calls that the humans are making, really get instantiated into practice the way the humans specified instead of the way the humans tried to do in these big combinatorial spaces where they can't really do what they intend to do. So historically, humans really believe in humans, and more so than they should. And already back in the 80s, I was writing a little bit about this, that what if there is a Martian that comes here and they're smarter than us? Then we're just the next animal. We're the chimpanzee now. We're not the best of the bunch. And with AI, we've seen that in a lot of applications that you get superhuman. One fun example was that when we were playing this brains versus AI rematch in Heads Up No Limit Texas Hold'em against the best humans in January 2017, the morning of the match, the international betting sites were putting us at the 4-1 or 5-1 underdog, and we ended up winning the match. Even 3 days in, when we had already beat the humans for 3 days in a row, even then the betting sites were still putting us at even. So humans really believe in humans.
Yeah, it would be a fascinating conversation actually to have with some of our faculty in social and decision sciences. The ways in which the
My wife actually works in that department.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm having this discussion.
I'm telling you nothing new.
Yeah, well, kidney exchanges like that. So the first kidney exchanges were manually matched, and they were very ad hoc, and rules were not clear, not transparent, and there are still private kidney exchanges that are manually matched in the US. But the national kidney exchange then went to optimization, and actually simpler forms of optimization had already been used by some of these private kidney exchanges as well. So there was a gradual transformation, but it's not complete. Some of the private kidney exchanges really do manual matching still today. So how it works today, the policy, or we call it the scoring rubric, like how do you assign points on the different potential transplants you could do? They have to do with, let's say, age, young people being preferred. They have to do with locality. They have to do with wait time, tissue type match, how good is a tissue type match, etc., etc. These are designed by policy committees. I sit on those committees. We have ethicists, we have transplant surgeons, we have nurses, we have all sorts of people on these policy committees. And then they go out for public comment, which typically take a year. And you get comments, you change your design, and you go out again. So that is kind of the framework. Now, what's an ethical framework? That's a good question. I mean, I've published on ethics with ethicists, and this is, from an engineering perspective, this is a little bit of a frustration for me, because the ethicists usually evaluate things ex post. As an engineer, I would like to get the specification up front. Like, what are the criteria? What are the ethical things that you want to measure? And then I want to design something that's as good as possible for those criteria. But that's not how ethicists typically work. So it's a bit of a frustration. I think in the future, where we have more of a kind of a market design, AI system design need, we're going to get into kind of operational ethics, where you really set down a framework and talk about the ethical trade-offs and issues up front before you design, and then you design, and then you field. Right now it's more like you design, then you have some feedback loop, and then you field, and then you have some more ethical feedback loop there. But I think that the ethical framework is going to shift more into kind of an ex-ante approach, which is a good thing. Well, I don't really have a good answer to that. I haven't really seen that, but I can tell you another related thing, which is that when we built better and better AIs for solving imperfect information games, and the leading benchmark for testing those systems is poker. There, we got to a point where human poker players would second guess the decisions of the AI and said, okay, now the AI is making a mistake and so on. We got to the point where when humans would say that, I would know from experience that chances are that actually the human is wrong, that the AI's decision is right, the human is wrong, while the human actually thought that they were right. So you could call that an undermining, but in reality, in almost all of those cases, the AI was right and taken to some human who knew even more about the game and maybe took 3 days to look at it and think through all of the issues. They later would come by and said, okay, here's a 3-page essay why that was exactly the right move. And it's just that humans don't think as deeply, and this was thinking 2 levels deeper in their words, and this was exactly the right word, but it was right action, but it was a weird one.
Yeah.
So maybe that's undermining. If you want to call different actions undermining, it's undermining, but they were better.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because where I wanted to go next is considering the concept of autonomy.
Yeah, I perceive it as valuable. Myself, I don't really use the autonomy word that much because I really believe that there's this hybrid where humans make value judgments or an ethical framework, if you like, even better, which leads to the value judgments. And then the AI instantiates the ethical framework or value judgments into every case that you see. And
Is it fair that in your mind, is that a hierarchy? Or are they just multiple inputs?
I think it's a hierarchy, and it's different timescales as well. The ethical framework comes into place over time with plenty of time to deliberate on those higher level decisions, of which there are far fewer. And then it gets instantiated into much larger numbers of decisions using the framework. And oftentimes, not always, under different timescales. So like in kidney exchange, we can talk about this ethical framework or even these value judgments oftentimes for 2-3 years on an individual topic. And it goes through rounds and rounds of feedback from all sorts of perspectives. So that's years. While when the AI makes decisions, we're talking about making a decision once a week, and the decision making takes minutes. So it's a very different time scale. And the same in autonomous cars. We could talk about what those cars should do with plenty of time in an office, but when they have to be done, you're talking milliseconds sometimes.
Right.
Well, I think there's 2 kinds of pitfalls. One or 2 pitfalls where you actually feel something that's not ready, and then there's pitfalls where you don't feel something that's better than human already. So people oftentimes talk about the first kind of pitfall. I'd like to bring both of those into the discussion. And perfection shouldn't be the benchmark. It's really, are we safer than humans? And that's the benchmark, because nothing is ever perfect. Oh, that's a great question, and I don't really know the answer to that. But that is a wonderful question. Yeah.
So can we mine into the kidney exchange example? Within that system, the configuration is such that the outputs are optimized beyond what a manual matching system has been able to accomplish in terms of the number of matches made by virtue of the different variations. And therefore, that's having an immediate impact on individual but also scaled lives within the system.
Yeah.
Is there ever the prospect of a mismatch, or if someone can get in and hack the system, let's say,
I see.
with that?
I see. Okay.
Where might where could the responsibility lie if it's an inadvertent mismatch, right? Something has just gone buggy with the algorithm, or if it was susceptible to hacking, where might responsibility lie?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, where the software runs, it runs on secure servers in Richmond at the UNOS headquarters. So they're very careful with HIPAA and all those types of things so that their servers are secure. So that's about the hacking. I guess, if they got hacked, it would be their responsibility. In terms of the AI decision making, we actually had when the kidney exchange was small, it was so small on day one that you could actually run a simpler solver off the shelf to actually see that you get the same solutions or equally good different solutions out. So they were very careful of that, as kind of having a shadow solver be there to make sure the answers are right. And the same we've seen in the FCC spectrum auctions. They tend to use shadow solvers, so they don't just use one AI, they have multiple AIs and they check that they come up with the same answer or at least equally good answers, optimal answers. Well, maybe not, in the kidney exchange, optimal answers. In the spectrum auctions, maybe not exactly, but yeah, so we are finding optimal answers with respect to the value judgment framework.
Yes.
Of course, you could ask whether those judgments are right in some sense, but those are man-made. And another issue is that, or maybe interesting topic, not so much an issue, is that what decisions humans would have made, because they're different than what the AI made, not as good, but they may have saved different people. So the same lives don't get saved. And even with the best decision making, there is not possibility to save all the lives because there just aren't enough donors to go around. So the solutions are different. The AI solution being better, but clearly it's not better for the people who didn't get selected.
Yeah, that really opens up the interpretation of harm, the ways in which that data could be compared somewhat longitudinally.
The human decision making is hard to quantify. You can't really look into their brain, and because it's not transparent, you don't know what they would do in various situations. You can look at what they did in the situations that they faced if that data were public. So I'll start with something more mundane than science fiction, which is that the separation of means and ends, of value judgments and instantiating the value judgments. I think that humans do this, AI does this, and we have this future match framework on which we have a paper that does that. So looking at how do we automatically instantiate the high-level value judgments. And I think it's not just for kidney exchange and not for matching problems, but for AI in general. I think that's a good one, and I think it's going to be more prevalent that we're going to come up with that type of a separation of what humans do, what AI does. General intelligence, I'm actually not a believer in artificial general intelligence. To me, AI is all about the applications and the benefits to humanity and different techniques for different applications. There's some generality in the techniques, of course, and maybe more generality in the future, but my goal has never been to build hell. So it's never been to build an AI that does everything. So I mean, I think that's only mildly interesting, and maybe the more serious AI people aren't really talking about it as much as the populists.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we didn't touch on today?
Well, I think it's great that you're doing this. I think AI ethics is very important going forward, because AI is really changing the world for the better and will in the long run. And how do we make sure that it's not used for bad, that it's used for good ways, and what does good even mean? I think that's very important, and how people will get used to working with AI. Instead of thinking that any AI decision that's superhuman, that's somehow a threat. How do humans actually understand it more as a tool and an augmentation and a helpful thing?